Before we begin, remember to subscribe to Whispers Beyond and enable notifications. Tonight's story takes us to the isolated cliffs of Grey Harbor Point, where in 1986, the unexplained disappearance of 3 lighthouse keepers triggered decades of horrifying rumors, government cover-ups, and unsolved deaths. The door was locked from the inside, the windows nailed shut, yet somehow they were gone. When rescuers forced their way into the lighthouse, the only sound was wind howling through broken glass. The beds were empty, the radio still hummed with static. A pot of coffee boiled dry on the stove, scorched black, and on the wall of the watchroom, 3 handprints, deep, charred black, burned into solid steel, each one pressed lower than the last, as if whoever left them had been dragged down screaming. No bodies were found, no footprints in the snow outside, not even blood, only the journal, pages torn, words smeared in something dark. The last entry read, "Don't open the door, no matter what you hear, don't. To understand what happened, you must go back to when Grey Harbor Point was still alive, back to when the lighthouse still guarded one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, back to when 3 men agreed to live in isolation for 6 long months, cut off from everything but the sea and the sky." The tower was built in 1901 by the Halverson Consortium, a shadowy billionaire network that controlled most of the Atlantic trade routes. They owned fleets of tankers, fishing trawlers, even warships, and they owned the lighthouse, every inch of it, as part of their promise to protect the coast. But locals whispered a different story. They said Halverson didn't build the lighthouse to guide ships. They built it to contain something. The keepers chosen for the 1986 winter rotation were strangers to each other. Samuel Creed, 51, ex-military, discharged after an incident nobody talked about. Jonas Pike, 35, brilliant but unstable, fired from the State Observatory for reasons sealed by court order. Matthew Voss, only 24, desperate for cash, running from debts he couldn't pay. 3 men, 1 tower, endless dark. For the first 2 months, nothing happened. Grey Harbor was brutal, but predictable. High winds, freezing spray, loneliness that chewed at your bones. They logged the weather, maintained the light, sent weekly transmissions to Halverson's central office, until the fog rolled in. It began one night, just after midnight, thicker than anything they'd ever seen. It swallowed the tower whole. The beam from the lantern couldn't pierce 10 feet out. The sound of the waves vanished. Even the gulls went silent. Then came the first knock, 3 sharp raps on the heavy iron door. They thought it was a prank, maybe a lost fisherman, maybe smugglers, but when they opened the door, no one was there, only footprints leading to the cliff's edge, and stopping, mid-air. The knocks returned every night, always 3, always louder. By the 2nd week, the men stopped sleeping. By the 3rd, they stopped trusting each other. Samuel started carving symbols into the walls, muttering prayers in languages Jonas swore didn't exist. Jonas locked himself in the watchroom, staring at the beam, insisting he saw faces in the light. Matthew wrote in the journal, page after page, "It knows our names now." The last night came fast. At 3:12 a.m., the radio picked up a voice, faint, distant, whispering through static. The transmission log recorded only 2 words, "Let me in." The door shook. 3 knocks, then silence. When the relief crew arrived 4 days later, the lighthouse was empty. The men were gone. The only trace, 3 burned handprints, and a journal warning never to open the door. Halverson sealed the investigation within hours. The tower was declared unsafe, dismantled, and erased from maritime maps. Official cause, structural collapse during winter storm. But ask anyone who still lives near Grey Harbor Point. Ask the fishermen who refuse to sail those waters. Ask the children who swear they hear knocking when the foghorn blows. They'll tell you the same thing. The tower may be gone, but the knocks never stopped. 3 knocks, always 3. They said the tower was gone. They lied. 2 years after the incident, a salvage diver working off the coast of Grey Harbor Point reported something strange, a structure, half buried in silt, the exact shape of the lighthouse foundation. He never resurfaced. The Halverson Consortium denied the rumors, of course. They always do, but leaked documents tell a different story. Transmissions, sealed memos, internal reports stamped classified. The lighthouse wasn't just a beacon, it was a cage. Weeks before the disappearance, all 3 keepers began reporting anomalies, unexplained power surges, strange interference on the radio, lights moving beneath the waves. Halverson dismissed the claims, ordered them to continue routine operations, but Jonas Pike kept copies of every message. He hid them in the journal, between pages soaked in seawater and blood. One note stood out, a single line written in a shaking hand. The knocking isn't coming from outside. By mid-January, the fog never lifted. Day and night blurred into endless grey. Time stopped meaning anything. The men stopped eating, stopped shaving, stopped speaking. The knocks grew louder. Sometimes it sounded like fists on the door, sometimes like nails scratching through the walls, sometimes like something inside the walls, trying to claw its way out. Samuel began sleeping with a knife. Jonas stopped sleeping at all. Matthew, the youngest, began talking to someone who wasn't there. Locals remember the strange lights that winter, columns of pale blue fire spiraling up from the cliffs, a hum so deep it rattled windows 40 miles inland. Havison agents arrived days later, sweeping the area, warning townspeople to stay indoors during weather events. Weather events, that's what they called it. Inside the tower, the men were unraveling. Samuel heard whispers in the stairwell, voices calling his name, telling him to look down. Jonas claimed he saw figures in the beam, faces pressed against the glass, staring in. Matthew began writing backward, filling the journal with frantic scrawls. One page stood out from the rest. 3 words repeated over and over, until the ink tore through the paper. Don't answer it. The last transmission came at 3:12 a.m., the same minute every report mentions. The same minute, the beam froze, glowing blue. The same minute, the knocking began again, slower this time, louder. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more, pause. Then, a voice, let me in. The lulls, let me in. The radio captured everything, the screams, the crash of furniture, the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor, and then silence, for exactly 39 seconds. Then a final sound, not knocking, not screaming, just breathing, close, wet, wrong. Halverson sealed the tower that morning, bricked the doors, welded the windows, declared the structure condemned, then ordered it demolished, but demolition crews never spoke about what they saw inside. One man went home and hanged himself that night, another clawed his own ears until he bled, the last simply vanished, leaving only 3 words scrawled in black paint across his living room wall, still knocking, still here. People think the story ended there. They're wrong. 30 years later, hikers on the cliffs still report hearing the sound at night. 3 knocks, always 3, and sometimes a voice. The locals say if you hear it, you have 2 choices. You run, or you answer, but whatever you do, never, ever, open the door. They buried the reports, they burned the tapes, they erased the lighthouse from every map, but they could never erase the sound, because 30 years later, the knocking returned, louder than before. In 2016, a private salvage crew tried to recover what remained of the Grey Harbor Point Foundation. 6 divers went down, only 1 came back. He surfaced screaming, eyes bloodshot, nails torn to the bone. He babbled 3 words over and over until his throat split raw. It's still breathing. Halverson sent in a retrieval team that same week, armed men in black suits, carrying equipment no one had ever seen before. Locals watched from the cliffs as helicopters circled the bay, dropping crates stamped with strange symbols. 2 hours after landing, the entire coastline went dark. Phones died, radio static, even the tide went silent. Then came the light, blue, blinding, pouring out of the water like a second sun, and faintly, beneath the roar of waves, the knocking. But to understand what they found, you must return to the night it began, the night the 3 keepers vanished. The journal pages from that night were water-damaged, blood-smeared, but still legible in fragments. What they describe doesn't match anything human. Knocking won't stop. Samuel opened the door. Jonas screaming. Gone. Light everywhere. Not sunlight. Wrong light. Voices inside my head. Not mine. They know me. And finally, scrawled across the last torn page, we are inside the beam. The beam. The light that froze over Cedar Bay. The light that burned handprints into steel. Halverson's own files, leaked years later, describe it as a non-terrestrial anomaly. A rupture. A door. Something older than the ocean itself. The lighthouse wasn't built to warn ships. It was built to hold the door shut. But doors don't stay closed forever. Eyewitnesses along the coast claimed that, in the final minutes before the disappearance, the fog began to move like something alive, curling against the tower windows, pressing inward as if it wanted to see. The men inside screamed, begged for help over the radio, but every frequency went dead. Neighbors miles away reported hearing the knocks, not faint this time, thunderous, echoing through the cliffs like cannon fire. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more, pause, then silence, until the beam turned blue. What happened inside remains unknown. Theories range from hallucination to mass hysteria to something far worse, contact. But Halverson's sealed autopsy files, yes, autopsy, tell a different story. 3 sets of fingerprints, 3 human DNA samples, but no bodies, only bones.
twisted into shapes no doctor could name. For decades, Halverson swore the site was secure, that whatever lived in the beam died with the lighthouse. But the knocks have returned, first faint, then louder, now deafening. Last winter, a group of teenagers broke into the abandoned cliffs for a dare. They filmed themselves laughing, taunting the legend, rapping on the black stones where the lighthouse once stood. 3 knocks. They knocked back. What the camera caught after that has never aired in full. Only fragments. A scream, a blinding flash of blue, and something inhuman crawling out of the fog, dragging itself toward the lens. The teenagers were never found. Grey Harbor Point is fenced off now. Government property, surveillance cameras, warning signs. But the locals know better. They hear it on stormy nights. 3 knocks echoing from the cliffs, carried by the wind, soft and patient, like fingernails on a coffin lid. And sometimes, a voice, "Let me in." They say if you hear it, you only have one choice. You run, and pray the door stays closed, because once it opens, it never closes again. The story ends, but the knocking never does.